borrow, bubbles, beware or bust. Greetings from Ballarat, Victoria, Australia. I'm Jerome Nugent-Smith and this is episode 2. In the first episode I talked about Australia's deteriorating relationship with China and specifically using iron ore exports from Australia to China as an example. So I suggest that you brush up on that and have a look at episode 1. In episode 2 I'm going to look at two other key Australian exports which are dominated by China, namely coal and education sectors. But just to give you a little bit of context and why I feel qualified to talk to you on this critical subject. My wife and I officially were invited and first went to China in late 1972. So coming up next year, it'll be 50 years since our first visit to China. So we have a long relationship with China and the Chinese people. And therefore, I feel that I'm ably qualified to talk to you and to offer my thoughts in terms of where this relationship is going and what impact it will have on the Australian economy and more specifically on your hip pocket. Well, first of all, the Australian-China relationship is dead. If it's not buried, then it soon will be buried in the balance of 2020-21. So, what impact will this have in terms of the three key sectors, iron ore, coal and education? Well, in simple terms, basically whatever Australia is exporting to China in the next 5 years will disappear. If not completely, then almost completely. Now, when you think about this is a very significant prediction, but it's one that I believe that is already happening and will continue to accelerate over the coming months and years. Now, as I mentioned in episode 1, iron ore accounts for 43% of Australia's exports. And in the case of Western Australia, it accounts for 82% of Australia's exports. Overall, China accounts for 33% of Australia's exports and dominates the three sectors that I've referred to. So let's now deal with coal. Coal will suffer a similar fate to iron ore, albeit maybe a lag time delayed in terms of its impact. But nevertheless, you'll see a slide in Australia's exports, a dramatic slide, in fact, of Australia's exports over the coming 5-year period. With regard to education, my prediction is that the current status quo of the education export sector, which is been totally destroyed by our Prime Minister's policies, not by COVID-19, but by our policies. He's deliberately set out to destroy Australia's secondary and tertiary export sector of education, and specifically that has flowed through to the Chinese market and so on, by deliberate actions of antagonising and offending China and Xi Jinping and the 1.4 billion Chinese people. So of course, once COVID-19 we're fully vaccinated in terms of the targets and so on, in my opinion, the Chinese students will not return to Australia, either for education or in terms for other sectors such as the casinos and gambling, like Crown Casino and Star Casino, which have built their business models on high net worth individuals and rollers coming into Australia and gambling their money away. So, in summary, the three key Australian export sectors, iron ore, coal and education, within the next 5 years in terms of exporting to China will be totally destroyed. And I don't think that Australia is prepared to replace China as a key export market with other markets. It will take a much longer period of time to achieve that. So the negative impacts on the Australian economy are going to be quite dramatic and drastic. They will result in a ballooning of Australia's debt and deficits. They'll create a substantial rise in unemployment, and not only in Western Australia, the key state, but throughout Australia because of the contagion effects that flow through. And of course, more directly, it will result in massive falls in the share prices of companies that are listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, such as BHP, Rio Tinto, Fortescue Metals, and so on, and a raft of other companies. So specifically in terms of how it's going to affect you and so on, in a word, your superannuation fund, the net wealth in your superannuation fund will be substantially reduced because the share prices of these companies, many of which are blue chip, will fall dramatically, and as a consequence, associated stocks on the ASX, which are also in the major superannuation funds, such as the banks and so on, anything that is aligned to these sectors and is benefiting from these sectors will show a marked deterioration in the share price and thus in your net wealth in your superannuation fund, including the ASX itself. So not good days ahead, but in many ways it could have been avoided. Can it be? Can the situation be retrieved? Well, in a word, probably not. Certainly not by our current Prime Minister. And the fact that since I mentioned the fact that my wife and I, our first visit was in 1972, it's interesting to point out in conclusion that our current Prime Minister hasn't visited Australia's #1 export country or importing country, or exporting as far as we're concerned, since he's become Prime Minister. So where the hell he's getting his advice from, I don't know. But fasten up, fasten your seatbelts, hold tight, because it's going to be a very, very bumpy ride in the coming months and years ahead. So this is the prodigal son from Bakery Hill signing off from Ballarat, Victoria, Australia. I look forward to catching up with you in episode 3. Thank you. Bye for now.